Shine.fm presents Stronger Together, a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationships, and community. Here's Seth Tower Hurd.
So when the Me Too hashtag popped up on social media this week, I knew that there was one guy we had to talk to for Stronger Together, and that's my friend Nate. Almost everybody that's ever going to be on Stronger Together is either going to be a Shine.fm artist or live in the Shine.fm listening area. But for this one, there was somebody that was so perfect to be able to discuss this topic that I had to reach out to him. Nate's from Nashville, Tennessee, and is one of the founders of an organization called Samson Society that helps restore men who have been through all different kinds of walks of life. You know, we are going to be discussing sensitive topics here. We're going to try to discuss it in a way that it would be discussed in church with kids around, but just to give you a little bit of disclaimer, this is a pretty heavy episode. So your story, I think that we want to just kind of preview it and say the best place to get the rest of it is on YouTube, because you've got some fantastic stuff out there. Your I Am Second story is amazing. Oh, yeah. The very quick version is you were a pastor who went through infidelity and got caught, and you thought your life was over. You thought, this is it. God is done with me. Nobody loves me. It's over. And then what happened?
Yeah. Well, then I found a safe place to bring my brokenness, tell the real truth. And it happened to be in the basement of the church in the middle of the week while all the well-behaved people were gone. But it was people like me who had learned that the love of the Father doesn't change when we fail.
Okay. And Samson Society is a place where people come for their last, I almost want to say their last attempt at Christianity in some ways. I mean, is that okay?
Yeah, that's accurate. Sure. Yeah,
I've done something that is so bad that I don't know if I can show my face, or it may not be that. It may just be I'm questioning, I'm burned out, I need to have a safe place to be able to discuss my doubts. And so, when the rest of the world is looking at this Harvey Weinstein situation, how horrible it is. And it is horrible.
Absolutely horrible. No doubt.
You are one of those people that says, because of where I've been, I know that the love of God can reach anyone, and that there's truly nothing that is beyond the work of the cross as far as forgiveness, right?
Right. Absolutely.
I honestly was not surprised by the Harvey Weinstein scandal or some of the other minor scandals have broke, because I'm a film and TV critic, and I just have incredibly low expectations for the morals of people in entertainment, because I've been around it. Right. And I mean, that might sound really cynical, but that's, I've been there. I've seen it. Like, that's what's going on.
Sure.
But I think it caught a lot of the world off guard, and the number of actresses and women who work in entertainment that came out and said, I've been harassed. And then that kicking off on social media, just everyday women saying, I've been harassed. I've been in situations I didn't want to be in. Yeah. And a lot of times in church even.
Yeah. Let's not lose sight of that fact. I mean, it's fun to kind of stay over here on this side of the river and throw rocks at Hollywood. But that problem is rampant and has been forever in the church as well.
Yeah. And I wish I could say, hey, I haven't seen anything on social media. I haven't heard anything about, someone on a church staff harassing a woman who goes there. Right. But that's been a story that's popped up over and over again in the media, as, this whole thing went from 0 to 100 miles an hour in about 9 days.
Right. Sure.
So let's get into the hope here, right? Because I think you're just going to have to start that off. Right. So you're married. And the thing is, you and I have been friends for years.
Yeah.
You have a marriage that I respect a ton. Your kids are great. You're leading a ministry that's reaching people around the country. And I don't know. I mean, if I would have met you in the middle of your mess, when you've been busted for infidelity and repeatedly, and thought your marriage was over, thought your life was over, thought you would never have a friend again, even. How do we find a solution in all of this mess that we've seen come out?
Wow. I mean, that's a huge, the beautiful thing about, the mess is that, when we finally have this head snapping, bone crushing collision with our own depravity, and it seems like the world is ending, at least if we haven't found the courage to step from the shadow into the light, now we've been pushed into the light. And the light is where hope is. We think that there's safety in the shadow, in the darkness, in the hiddenness, that we have a better chance of surviving if nobody finds out. But it's actually in the light. As long as we can avoid, the crowds that are out to crucify us, if we can actually become humble, find a place safe enough to be completely honest, that's where God meets us. He meets us at the end of the road. I really don't think that I met Jesus, even though I was a highly visible, well-respected Christian leader in my little world. I don't think I ever really met Jesus until I found myself, face down in the pig pen.
If you're a male who would admit, my behavior's been wrong and I've been caught in some way, even if it's just kind of inappropriately, speaking to women in a way that's demeaning or something like that.
Right, sure.
If you're willing to bottom out and just say, man, I need help. Man, I need to talk to somebody about this. Yeah. Maybe this is the way I grew up. And I now know that this isn't okay. Let's flip the script though. Like, you're working with you've worked with men who've confessed all kinds of things, have come out of all kinds of issues, and found the real Jesus, right?
Right.
So having seen both sides of the coin, what about women that are on the other side and say, I've been in a job where, my boss has said things to me that shouldn't be said. I felt pushed. I felt pressured. I felt uncomfortable. What do I do? Because I'm also scared of losing my job. I also need the money.
Yeah. Boy, that's the one thing that I'm grateful for. Getting into recovery for my particular form of addiction was like regaining consciousness. I lived almost in a trance for a couple decades in a culture that sees women as bodies, as objects. And so much of the time when I was around women, I wasn't seeing people like myself. In recovery, I can see men as people and women as people. And now my heart hurts for what we subject each other to. So it's a very tough spot for women. And I think the church is to be the safe place for women. The first century church was so countercultural in its view of women, because in the first century, women did not count in the least. And yet we have this radical community in which women have a very prominent role. And Paul tells us that, after what Christ has done in this body, there's no longer Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, but all are one in Christ Jesus. Boy, that's a radical thing.
Yeah. And maybe sometimes if you're a fairly new Christian, you're just kind of getting into reading the Bible, you don't realize that, not just women, but children were basically considered to be kind of throwaway beings as well in the New Testament. Sure. So Christianity restores humanity in that way. Right. How can the church be a safe place in the middle of a situation like this? Because, I'm guessing that there's a lot of people who, are volunteer leaders in church or, full-time minister leaders in church saying, I see this going on. I know that there are, women and men being affected by this in the congregation where I serve at. And I don't know how do I address a problem that's so big?
Part of it, I think, is just, I'm really grateful for this Me Too hashtag, because I think it's brought to prominence a conversation that we need to have. And it reminds me of one of the early days in the Samson Society. A mutual friend of ours spoke up during a meeting. We'd been meeting maybe for a few months, and we would start the meeting with kind of this locker room vibe, this kind of towel snapping insult thing, where especially we made gay jokes. And so this friend of ours spoke up at one point and he said, you know what, this isn't right. This room is not safe for a guy who has any kind of a problem with same-sex attraction. We have to cut this out. And he called us to it, and we heeded his admonition, and we stopped making the jokes. And a few weeks after that, somebody had the nerve then to actually say out loud, describe out loud the biggest battle in there. And as soon as one person did, then somebody else could, and somebody else could. We need to give space, you and I, to our sisters in the church, to so that and to call each other, to call the men out. That, you know what, we live in a culture that sexualizes women, that objectifies women. That is not what this fellowship is. We are higher than that. We are better than that, and we're not going to put up with it. That makes it, I think, safe for our sisters.
And I will say, I've heard a lot of male pastors make a lot of like stereotype jokes.
Oh yeah,
throughout my life that I think maybe when I was younger, I thought maybe that's just kind of how people joked around. And I think it even did bother my conscience. But as I get older, I'm like, whoa, this is not something I think we want to be putting out there.
No. We bought that. It's funny. The church gets blamed for being patriarchal, but it's the culture that's patriarchal. And we picked that up. I think the church is to be an egalitarian fellowship where men and women are equally respected, even if roles are different.
Because wherever you're at, people come from, listen to Shine.fm from all kinds of different kinds of churches.
Yeah.
But one thing we can all agree on is respect and treating people with dignity, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. So a girl is not second class.
Someone who's come out of this, who has, in your more distant past at this point, because you've been on the right road for a long time, but you admitted you treated women pretty bad when you were going through your own addiction.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Yeah, I used women.
Your kids are adults. I've hung out with them. They're great. What have you talked to them about? Like as they were growing up, as they entered adulthood, as somebody who didn't do it all right when they were children.
Yeah.
How did you teach them what they needed to know after that?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, it was long talks. It was a lot of amends on my part, a lot of apology, a lot of straightening things out. And I think confirming in their own hearts and minds what the kids, what my sons and daughter already knew was the right thing to do. And I'll tell you what, I still am walking down that healing road with my daughter. She's married now, got 3 kids, but she still carries the effects of the way I treated women in general and her in particular. She was very conscious that she was in a different category, and it was a step down from her brothers. And so, in fact, I meet with her every week now. We go for a walk. We have a meal. We're planning to go on a 10-day walk in England this summer to help talk through and see if we can repair the damage I did during those years.
Wow. If you had it to do over again, at what point do you think in the culture today we need to be talking to our kids specifically about, if you're a male child, you don't let women get pushed around and demeaned. And if you're, if you're a girl, this is when you need to speak up. People can't say this to you. They can't treat you, in these ways. And you need to speak up immediately, because this Me Too hashtag that's hit social media about harassment. A lot of the stories are about, kids that were growing up in church who were harassed or had bad things done to them, and they didn't speak up because they thought, well, that person's a volunteer leader or, on staff or whatever. So I guess I can't get them in trouble.
Yeah. I mean, that is a huge problem, and it points to, we have to own the fact that in some ways we have allowed our church culture to become sick. We've allowed something alien to the faith to take root in the faith. And I think we have to be relentless about rooting it out. Without forming firing squads and shooting everybody who's crossed the line. Because if we're honest, most of us guys at some point have crossed the line. Jesus was pretty clear about that when he talked to his disciples, and he said, you can commit adultery without physically committing adultery. And I think all of us have been culpable at one point or another of demeaning our sisters. And it's time to reclaim and reestablish the dignity of women that is our heritage. It needs to be a hallmark of the Christian church. And one of our sisters, a girl in the church, she needs to know that if she speaks up, her brothers are going to come to her defense. And if she calls another brother on it, he's going to see it and repent quickly.
That's transformative. It's so simple. But I can think of different times in my life while attending church that I haven't seen that happen.
Yeah.
Okay. As far as like healing and recovery, that you've walked with alongside a lot of men, and obviously there are things that the average layperson can't help with that needs to be handled in professional counseling situations.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
But beyond that, how have you seen healing happen on both sides of the harassment and demeaning, and issues like that, from men who used to behave that way to women who, you talked about your own daughter still working through that, right? Yeah. But how does the healing process start? How long does it take? I suppose there's always, work that God's doing in our lives, right? But talk to me.
Healing, whether it's emotional healing or physical healing, God has designed us to heal. Our bodies do heal, our minds do heal, but that's always progressive. I mean, he has the ability and occasionally will step in to give us an instant healing, but that's not the way he typically works. I was counseled early in recovery, but when I first caught a glimpse of, the damage that I had done to my wife, I wanted to make it better right away. And my guides and counselors and brothers in recovery told me that I couldn't hurry up the process, that my job was to make a living amends. Here's an interesting thing. My wife told me at one point that what hurt her more than my infidelity was the condescending way I had treated her for 20 years. That hurt more. And so learning now to ask my wife's advice, to listen to it, to take it, to actually come face to face with the fact that God gave me a partner in this life, and I disregarded her for 20 years. I used her in much the same way that I used women outside my marriage. And it's a very proud and destructive attitude.
If you're just joining us, Nate Larkin runs an organization called Samson Society. Very rare we have somebody outside the Shine Data from listening area on, but with this hashtag #MeToo that hit social media about the number of women who were speaking out about being harassed, he's somebody that has seen all sides of that issue and all sides of the healing equation. And so, although we could have, I'm convinced, put on literally thousands of stories from the Shine Data FM listening area of harassment in the church, out of the church, at work, and social functions. And those stories should be heard, but I really hope that we could start to find some workable solutions here, as there's so much pain being passed around right now. Part of the question is just what do we do with it? So that's what we're doing right here. Let's talk about the general culture at large, right? Because as Christians, we're going into a culture that honestly, and as I said, I'm a movie critic, I'm a TV critic. Hollywood kind of thinks this is okay and doesn't mind if they get caught, and they mind if they get caught, but that's about all they mind, right? And if you don't believe me on that, watch TV and movies and see how women are, depicted as the kind of characters that they're forced into a lot of times.
Right. Sure.
As Christians, as we go out into a culture, if you're a man at work, a woman at work, and also a person who, consumes media in general, obviously if you consume Christian media, but there probably should be a line we don't cross, not just content wise, but I've been asking the question, if Ben Affleck is accused, really is guilty of some things he's been guilty of, do I really have any business giving him $10 and seeing his movie next month? Mm-hmm. In some ways, I don't think boycotts work because I don't think companies pay attention to them. Yeah. But on the other side of things, as Christians, there has to be a point where we intersect with culture, where we say, okay, I'm not going to give money to that thing anymore.
Yeah. And I think, as much as that, I think I can't continue to bathe in a pool that is going to train me unconsciously in an attitude toward women that runs contrary to what God has told me is true. When women are just objects, where they're there to where their intellect is not valued, where their emotions are not listened to, where they're not seen as people. And that really describes an awful lot of popular culture.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so I think a lot of Christians would say, well, I'm not going to watch this movie or this show because of the visual content on the screen. We'll leave it there. But also there's
the emotional content.
Yeah, the emotional content of if, certain female characters are just demeaned, maybe that's a place we should be stepping away from. And again, I'm a movie and TV critic. I actually think there's a lot of great stuff out there that you can see. I think there's a lot of great stuff because there are some Christians who are like, well, there's nothing. It's all garbage. I don't agree with that. I think there's a ton of redemptive stories that actually come out of the very broken system of Hollywood. I think there's been some fantastic films this year that I'd love to tell you about. This is not the format for that, but I don't think withdrawing is the issue. But this is the first time I've ever thought about, what am I watching that might be like kind of okay in church to say you're watching, but it's a comedy, and the way they're making fun of women or playing into stereotypes after this, Me Too hashtag has come out, it should make me and others stop and think, do I really want to be engaging with that? Because that's going to change the way I think, even if it's PG.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, it's what is a woman for? What is a girl for? I mean, I think that's the fundamental question. And that question is answered. It can be answered in what appears to be the most squeaky clean way, in a way that she, just by ignoring, overlooking, a woman and her value as a human being, that sets it up and makes her okay to be a target.
Okay. I'm trying to think if there's any examples, and maybe I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I bet if we go back and even look at like shows that would be okay to reference in church, TV shows, if we cross-examine it after the evidence that's come out this week, I wonder if I would feel differently about even watching some of that. That's why I said PG.
Yeah. Well, I think I think as long as we're having a critical conversation, we can let's talk about Happy Days.
Okay. Which may be a lot of people that may not have seen.
Okay, let's talk about Happy Days.
Okay, which is, by the way, if you've never seen it, it's an old show, like 1970s, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
so it did come out before I was born. I'm familiar with it.
I went too far back. Okay. I'm trying to find something.
No, we can do it. I think most people kind of know what it is.
We could talk about Fonzie's attitude toward women. Okay, who would be so anyway, it's the macho character who can snap his finger and women will come around and they're just there to be arm candy.
To make him look better. Hang out with him to make him look better.
That's right. That is, and that is the sole purpose of girls on that television show.
So if you just go off of the rating that appears in the corner of the TV, if this is on a rerun, right? Because most people are probably familiar with what it is. I thought you were going to get more specific into the plot. But if you just go with the rating, it's actually probably a G-rated show.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Because there's no content that that the ratings bureau or whatever would find offensive, but actually the attitude, that's a pretty destructive attitude.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that we can't watch Happy Days, but if we do watch Happy Days, let's have a conversation about kind of the meta message. What's being said between the lines? And is it okay for Fonzie just to grab a girl and kiss her? I would say no.
And as someone who's raised healthy adults, you can, I bet, tell us that kids are picking up on messaging really early before they even realizing what they're internalizing. So if you're just flipping around and, a 4 to 7 year old is seeing that, boy or girl, they're getting some kind of message out of that.
Sure. And that, and that's assuming that we are successfully able to filter out of our homes the stuff we don't want our kids to see, because there is some just extremely destructive content that's available to any unsupervised child. The kind of stuff that wrecked my life when I saw it for the first time as a married man. Yeah,
and obviously we want to keep this family friendly. But when you talk to families about this, what do you recommend? You recommend filters? You recommend?
Yeah, we gotta stay on top of this. and it's almost impossible. And we have to have more than that. We have to have age appropriate conversations earlier than feels comfortable, because the world is always pushing the envelope, and our kids are being exposed long before we think they are. So we have to be proactive, and because if we rely just on sheltering our kids, that stuff is going to find a hole sooner or later.
This is one of those examples I'm not going to be real specific on, because I try to be very careful about not just kind of popping off with a lip if I haven't done my research. But I remember a year ago, Disney said, we're going to get more edgy for the Disney Channel. I'm like, wait, you're going to get more edgy for the Disney Channel?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
And it's because they said that the kids are so into YouTube that if they don't do something to be more culturally relevant, they're going to just fall off the map. And I remember kind of reading about some of the shows that they were talking about putting out there, and I'm like, whoa, that's like, really? We need to do this to get kids to pay attention now?
Yeah. That's the direction it's going, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's easy to see that as a trusted brand, right? So you're saying you really need to be examining everything.
Right. Got to be engaged.
Even with if your kids were little now, would you be paying attention to when we're talking about how women are depicted, even like the messaging of songs that they might find on YouTube on their own?
Sure.
And having discussions around all that stuff.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. Did your kids, did they ever feel, as you got healthy and tried to give them better stories to pay attention to, books, music, movies, wherever, and then you had to say no sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Did your kids ever feel like the outcasts at school because they weren't allowed to have, they weren't allowed to maybe watch or listen to some of the other stuff that the other kids were into at the time? And how did you handle that?
Yeah, I think they did. It's all about, you know what? You probably ought to talk to my wife about this, because I was absent without leave during those years. I was not the most attentive parent when my kids were growing up, because I was caught in addiction during that time. But she did a fabulous job of maintaining open conversations and communications with the kids.
Okay. So you've really got to be talking through it and realize that sometimes you got to make a decision for your kid that they're not ready for.
Yeah.
Just as we wrap this thing up, once again, we're with Nate Larkin, one of the founders of the Samson Society, who has walked through addiction, who's seen all sides of what has been deemed on social media this week, the hashtag Me Too moments of women being harassed and demeaned. Anything else? We've got just a couple minutes to go here. So anything else that you really just want to put out there, including, ways that the Samson Society does help in how people can find safe places in their own churches, whether or not, there's a Samson community near them. How do you go about finding a safe place in your church to be able to talk about this stuff? Yeah,
there should be somewhere in your church or in your larger church community, a counselor you can talk to, if not a trusted group, a safe group. It's real important. I'll tell you what, these traumatic events, what we tend to want, to be demeaned in this way, or especially to be violated in this way, something that goes to the core of your identity.
Yeah. And by the way, just somebody saying something awful to you can go to the core of your identity.
Yeah.
Especially when you don't feel safe.
Oh, sure. And so our instinct is going to be to try to minimize it. If we don't feel that there's a safe place to talk about it, to process it, to get some help separating ourselves from it, we can internalize it, and that can fester over time and just do tremendous damage. And we wind up crippled emotionally. It makes it more difficult for us to trust, harder to form a lifelong trusting relationship with the mate that God sends our way. So it is important to find a counselor or a group, somebody to talk to about what's happened. Okay.
Nate Larkin, if you want to know more about his story, we highly recommend, there's a YouTube video called I Am Second, where he really breaks down his testimony. And you also have a podcast that people can check out for further resources on this.
Yeah, the Pirate Monk Podcast.
Which you can search iTunes or wherever you're grabbing podcasts at.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's been great to talk with you again, Tower.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been. And man, I really appreciate, like I said, there's a lot of ways we could have come at this, but
Yeah.
you had a lot of candor here, and hopefully we're all leaving saying, I got to watch out for myself. I got to watch out for other people. I got to watch out for the kids in my life.
Yes.
In this
absolutely.
area around harassment.
Yeah.
This is Stronger Together. It's shine.fm.
That was Stronger Together, a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationships, and community.